Okay, so I think we should be good to go. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this evening for our first workshop for the updates to the City of Hemet's safety element updates, as well as the creation of our new environmental justice element. We'll have a presentation for you tonight with some engagements at the end, and thank you all for participating and joining us. I'll turn it over to HP to give a little introduction.
Great. Good evening, everyone who's joining us. Tonight, we're going to talk about the safety element update, so as well as the environmental justice element update. And we will have this as both English and Spanish. And those of you who need Spanish translation, just let us know, and we'll have another link that will take you to the Spanish version of it. But this is a full participation, so anyone is encouraged to participate and be involved in the process. Thank you so much, and I'll give it back to Kimberly to get it started.
Thank you, HB. So if anybody needs Spanish translation, if you could please raise your hand and we will put the link in the chat for how to join.
Buenas noches, bienvenidos a la actualización del elemento de seguridad y elemento de justicia ambiental. Como se mencionó anteriormente en inglés, esta presentación se va a dar también en español. Si hay alguien en la audiencia que necesita escuchar la presentación en español, por favor, levanten la mano, utilicen la función de levantar la mano o envíen un mensaje para avisarnos. Se les moverá a una sala en español para que escuchen toda la presentación en español. Gracias.
Okay. Hi, everyone. On today's agenda, we'll be quickly going through what general plan updates are happening in the city of Hemet right now. Then we'll move on to the safety element and discuss what a safety element is, what the purpose of a safety element is, and the climate vulnerability assessment portion of the element. Then we'll move on to the newly required environmental justice element, its background, and its focus on disadvantaged communities and how the element will engage with the community. After discussing the two elements, we will move on to opportunities for public participation. Next slide. So as shown on the screen, there are currently 3 updates being made to the general plan right now. The 3 updates are the housing element update, the safety element update, and the addition of the new environmental justice element. Next slide. So what is a safety element? A safety element is a required element of the general plan and plans for the potential of emergency events to minimize risk of injury, loss or damage of property, and environmental damage from natural and man-made hazards. Hemet's safety element was last updated in 2012 and addresses risks, hazards such as fires, floods, droughts, earthquakes, and landslides. The element establishes goals, policies, and objectives to guide current and future safety mitigation strategies to reduce risk. Next slide. So the current update will include a review by CAL FIRE of the fire and wildfire emergency discussions, and will work with agencies to look at evacuation routes and emergency procedures. The update also includes the addition of climate change considerations in the form of the climate vulnerability assessment.
Good evening, everybody. A climate vulnerability assessment is a new requirement under California law that safety elements consider risks and hazards due to a changing climate. A CVA will be performed as part of the safety element update, and it will rely on research of current city policies like the Hemet Climate Action Plan and rely on statewide tools such as Cal Enviro Screen and Cal Adapt. Okay, there we go. A CVA assesses the vulnerability of a city's population, its infrastructure, and its services to climate change induced effects or climate stressors. These effects could include high heat days, extreme storms leading to downed power lines and road closures, and continued drought. On this slide, we present the primary hazard and secondary hazards we will be considering in Hemet's CVA. A review of existing climate resilience policies will also be performed as part of the CVA and includes the requirement, such as the requirement that new development be designed to minimize consumption of water, energy, and other resources contained in the land use element, and the encouragement of service providers to provide green leadership by incorporating alternative energy as contained in the community services and infrastructure element. With that, that concludes our short presentation on the safety element updates, and we pivot now to the environmental justice element. I just want to pause here for a moment and ask if anyone else has joined that would prefer to have Spanish translation, to go ahead, in case you missed the introduction, to use the chat function or the notification to let us know that you would prefer in Spanish language, and we can arrange for that.
Estamos haciendo una pausa en este momento. Si alguien más se unió a la reunión y desea escuchar la presentación en español, nos pueden, por favor, levantar la mano o avisar para ponerlos en una sala donde pueden escuchar toda la presentación en español en caso de que no hayan escuchado la introducción. Gracias.
Environmental justice element is a new requirement that was established under state law SB 1000 recently. It requires when a general plan is updated that the consideration of disadvantaged communities be considered in an environmental justice element or policies contained in other elements. And disadvantaged communities are those that are disproportionately burdened by multiple sources of pollution. And the goal of an EJ element is to establish goals to address the unique or compounded health risk that is present in disadvantaged communities by decreasing pollution exposure, increasing community assets engagement, and improving overall health. And because Hemet has identified disadvantaged communities, and we will get to that in the next couple of slides, Hemet will be addressing these needs either in a separate EJ element or by integrating related goals, policies, and objectives throughout other elements. So how do we identify disadvantaged communities? The state of California has developed the Cal Enviro Screen tool through its Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. This very same tool is used by the state to promote compliance with environmental laws, prioritize site cleanup activities, and identify opportunities for sustained economic development. Cal Enviro Screen is a publicly available tool that provides statewide data used to identify communities disproportionately impacted by or vulnerable to environmental pollution through 12 indicators of pollution burden and 8 indicators related to population characteristics and other vulnerabilities. A little bit more about the Cal Enviro Screen 4.0 tool. Again, it's a publicly available mapping tool, and it produces by census tract a ranking based on these indicators, 12 indicators and 8 socioeconomic indicators, as we talked about before. This is a snapshot of the city of Hemet's Cal Enviro Screen ratings for its approximately 24 census tracts. As you can see, scores range from the 25th percentile to as high as the 80th percentile. The higher a number, the higher the burden. But we must combine that with economic data at the census tract level to complete the identification. On the next 2 slides are the same census tracts mapped against the mean household income and the state low household income levels. Combining all 3 sets of data, as you can see here, there are 4 census tracts highlighted here in pink that meet the state's definition of disadvantaged communities. However, relying solely on the published data, excuse me, is not the only method that is appropriate. I'm so sorry, I'm getting over a cold. To identify potential vulnerable and sensitive populations within the city. The demographic data has certain limits, including the fact that it's averaged over an entire census tract. Therefore, unique neighborhoods or pockets and dispersed sensitive populations may not be visible relying on the data analysis method only. In addition, Cal EnviroScreen weightings may not reflect local concerns and conditions. So that is one of the main reasons we are conducting the outreach today. And in fact, there is an online EJ survey and this link here, which will be available on the city's website. So the outreach and the purpose of one of the purposes of the workshop today is in fact to, there's one tonight, and another one coming up later as we get through the process. And we will continue to conduct the outreach through stakeholder interviews, online engagement, and the online survey mentioned earlier. Returning back to the process of developing an environmental justice element. Part of this will be, this process will involve reviewing existing general plan goals and policies that are directly or indirectly related to environmental justice topics. A few are listed here, including raising public awareness of the appropriate manner to dispose of household hazardous waste contained in the public safety element, and the city's promotion of urban design measures that encourage alternatives to single occupancy vehicle transportation already contained in the current circulation element. Through this process, with involvement and careful consideration by the city, the environmental justice element will contain proposed new or revised environmental justice policies. These are aimed at improving community health, recreation, and economic opportunities through improvements in air quality, water quality, better access to transportation, a focus on health and nutrition, and approaching unique compounded health risks and threats brought on by a changing climate. At this point, this concludes our presentation portion of tonight's workshop. Are there any questions before we proceed to open the public workshop? Go ahead and take yourself off mute or raise your hand. If not, we would gladly proceed to the workshop portion. And again, we want to thank you for taking time out of your busy evening to be with us here. Anyone who cares to participate, we ask that you use the chat feature to send a question or a comment or just a topic area, and then or raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute and provide your comments. Just a few friendly rules of the road, so to speak, during a workshop. First, we want to thank you again for any and all participation, and please participate. We are here to listen. All we ask is that you be honest, be as specific as you can in your comments, be inclusive of points of view, and be respectful of all participants. We'd like, just to keep it a little bit organized, to take up the issue of the safety element first. I want to remind folks that we are recording this, and that is simply for our note taking. We want to accurately reflect the themes and specific comments that are brought forth during this process. Does anyone have any comments on the safety element? Any questions of part of the safety element? Maybe you've never read it. Maybe you want to understand its purpose and why we're updating it. Hearing none, seeing no hands, I will gladly move on to the environmental justice portion of the workshop. And again, our goal here is to really reach out to the citizens of Hemet and see if there are any disadvantaged communities. Returning to this graph that I showed you earlier, there were these 4 census tracts have been identified as meeting the strict prescriptive definition of a disadvantaged community. It doesn't mean there aren't others. And so we'd like to hear from anyone who has some thoughts on the process, the results, and whether or not they feel there are other areas of the city that have special consideration, either due to its pollution burden or the nature of the population that reside there. Seeing or hearing no comments, and I'm assuming my panelists are helping me look at the grid also. We were hoping to engage on 3 topics under environmental justice: housing, transportation, and quality of life. We can take them in any order or open forum if anyone has any thoughts on environmental justice, housing, questions that we've typically discussed at other outreach events, include accessibility to safe and affordable housing, thoughts on how the city's doing encouraging a broad array of housing types. Again, transportation, whether or not the city is has access to non-single occupancy transportation modes, what anybody would like to see in the way of biking or walkability. Any thoughts anyone wants to share on these topics?
Yeah, Heidi, this is Monique. Monique Alanis-Flater, principal planner. Just wanted to make a comment that most recently at our most recent planning commission meeting where we were presenting our general plan progress report, we talked about kind of some of the upcoming priorities for the city that we'd like to focus on. And since you mentioned the transportation, open space and trails is one of those components that they would like to see for us to find other ways of pedestrian activity throughout the city.
Yeah, that's exactly on point. Thank you, Monique. And lastly, kind of an open umbrella topic area, quality of life. Could include anything from safe water, air quality, access to affordable and healthy food options. An open-ended question I love to ask is, if you were mayor for the day, what would you want to see changed in your city? Yeah. And just in general, if there's any concluding questions or comments on the process that we're undergoing. And I just remind everybody, as we said earlier, there will be a second workshop after we get through more of the analysis of the existing policies and goals. And then we really do like to survey and take a look at what other similar cities are doing. And there's some good clearinghouses of ideas as more EJ elements are being completed statewide. So there's an opportunity to borrow best practices. So we'd love to hear from anyone who knows of or has heard of things they like that other areas and jurisdictions are doing. Those are exactly the kinds of suggestions we'd love to hear from everybody through the survey that's online. It's available in both English and Spanish. Hearing none, brings us to the conclusion. HP, did you have any closing words you wanted to offer?
I don't have any closing remarks, just that any participation, even after this is over, you can always contact the city, contact Monique through that email address or phone number. And if you have any concerns or questions or comments, we're always willing to take that into consideration and together as part of this process.
And I'll give one more shout out to anyone of our citizens who'd like to make a comment or question. We're here to answer anything on process or timeline, results, anything. If not, I think we can conclude this workshop. I mean, it's up to the city if we'd like to stay, if people join later, or it's completely up to you.
Heidi, can you just kind of go over what your experience is with other cities that might have gone through the process or are going through the process? What are some of the topics or items that you've seen?
Great, yeah, great topic. A lot of the ones that I'm aware of are focusing on, large aspirational things, but also trying to include goals and objectives that are really tangible, that sort of that low-hanging fruit, HP. And one of them, because this is really an all-encompassing concept, it's a little bit out of sync with what you think a general plan is responsible for, right? Which are the citizens and the safety and the roads. And it's really about the promotion of health and improvement, both mental health and physical health. And so some of the low-hanging fruit that other cities are considering are ways to encourage, say, farmers markets to really, if you have areas of your city that are, referred to as food deserts, that don't have access to fresh food options, that they have that as a by right, for example. That's something you can streamline the permitting process, that you don't need a conditional use permit. Say if it's only held once a week, weekends, that sort of thing. That's been very popular. We yet to see how many are holding them, but it's been a very popular idea. But also, as Monique mentioned, so your city's well on its way, it's that connectivity of walkability and alternative transportation. Excuse me. Some have just committed to putting together a citizen working group to really go out and boots on the street, kind of access where needed improvements in bike lanes, where are they not properly striped, where do people not feel safe crossing train tracks, right? Those sorts of small hindrances, but large in impact, but small to fix. Things that are keeping people from feeling like they can access parts of the city without their automobile. So that's another really popular theme. So a trail network could help to work towards that. But it's just been amazing when we have that kind of citizen participation, because you and the city staff and public works can't be everywhere, right? You can't identify every missing link of bike lane or sidewalk that's failing, et cetera. And so there's in some communities, there's a strong biking coalition. So that's been very popular. And then there's other cities who are considering very serious looks at the kinds of industries that are settling in their cities and limiting the number if those happen to be heavy in, say, air pollution. And so they've actually looked at limits or moratoriums on certain land uses. So that's, probably a really big, issue. And so I'm trying to kind of give you some bookends. And then there's everything in between. And I had one city that really liked the idea of more cooperation with and outreach with education, everything from having student farms to get them to the idea of how we grow food and how we, sort of interact with the earth and the ecosystem, to community farming, et cetera. So that's been another one that's been, kind of popular. Then, the programs that already exist, like Safe Routes to School, and et cetera, those kind of get tied into this issue. So then the people feel they might have more choices for schools, and that sort of, which leads to the kind of economic, mobility that this is also intended. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Yes, it does. You also mentioned quality of life. Has any community discussed how the community is affected by current homeless crisis in their neighborhood, as far as the quality of life is concerned, with the existing residents and their homes versus people that are coming in to the city in influx, and how that plays into the quality of life and what they view as a peaceful place where they can live, work, and play.
Yeah. I mean, the issue of the unhoused, is a large regional issue. So thank you for asking about that. I have not personally been involved with a city that has tried to take that on through their EJ element, not to say it isn't considered. In fact, the county of Riverside, when they did their climate vulnerability assessment, specifically looked at the unhoused separate and the vulnerabilities of the unhoused to high heat and extreme storms, versus citizens who are housed. And so I thought that was a very thoughtful treatment, but at a very large scale, as you can imagine. What one city has done, or is considering, so I can't say which city because it hasn't been adopted yet, is more assistance with keeping people who are currently housed but could lose housing in housing, to avoid people dropping into the ranks of the unhoused. And that's where cities feel like they have some influence, or a little more influence than the idea of those who are unhoused, or those who might be transitory through their town. And the idea of rental assistance, and even some really novel programs that I've just heard about, which is the difficulty the elderly have at keeping a roof over their head, the price of home ownership, just taxes and insurance, when you're on a fixed income. And the idea of matching a senior with a roommate, it's really an interesting program. Works well in a college town. So, it might not be applicable everywhere, but when you have young adults looking for housing, and the idea is to provide a really thorough screening and matching the idea of having someone help pay a little rent for a bedroom. They're not caregivers, but they're companions. The elderly then have someone in the house. It's helping them with a little bit of income, and each negotiates their own, rental agreement. And some, it does involve a little yard work or things that can improve the, even the resilience of the house, and another set of eyes saying, hey, I think you got a leaky gutter, that there's been some real benefit to that. So I do know a community who does that, and another one who's thinking about it. So that's, I think, a very novel program trying to help. Again, the elderly are quite vulnerable to, the economic woes, and to really just help anyone from, falling into the ranks of the unhoused.
Thank you. I do have one additional question. You mentioned about air quality. So are there communities out there that are switching over from the gasoline-powered vehicles to electric vehicles as a part of a fleet, or an agency that's completely transferring it over, school district, or busing system, transit authority, and things of that sort?
Yeah, exactly. And there's some good public-private partnerships out there to just encourage the placement of EV chargers, which are money generating for the vendor, but the city can make available, the parking spots, even on streets. These chargers now, these new generation EV chargers are so much smaller, and from a zoning and ordinance, you can start requiring a certain percentage be wired. The idea is to reward people who might, gravitate towards that. And it's that subtle reminder to everybody that, hey, your EV car is special here, you know. So there are a lot of cities considering that. And then, as you know, there is the fleets, and you know, everything from school buses to your own fleet vehicles, getting them off of petroleum, off diesel and gas, and that's usually part of a jurisdiction's really big goals on their climate action plan, you know, to get that down. And you know, supply chain issues aside right now, which it's hard to get any new vehicle. So maybe now's not the time to be shopping for new fleet vehicles. But what people are, or what cities are doing, are looking at the lifetime of their assets and planning in essentially what we call future proofing, so that we don't continue to buy what we're comfortable with, right? We've always had gasoline. Our folks know how to fix a gasoline engine, so let's replace with like. But to think that, yeah, you know, the fleet vehicles we have now might have a 5-year, you know, life left on them. Let's plan for that extra price. You know, let's plan now. Rainy day fund, put a little bit away, so that 5 years from now, when there's even more choices on EV vehicles than there are today, you're prepared to close that gap, which is quite real on that upfront capital cost, you know.
Great, thank you. I think Monique has her hand up.
You. Yes, Heidi's now. So this is a really great discussion, and since we're talking about it and talking about what, you know, what would be the environmental justice element, what are the components, what's in the safety element, just so that we can, you know, I think we're talking about climate, you know, climate change, kind of some of the air quality. I kind of have two questions. Can you tell us a little bit about, and I guess I'll pose two questions, a little bit about, the first one would be, what can we expect? What are cities doing to address fire and flood safety? I know every community is unique and they have their own environmental constraints. So I'm just kind of curious of like maybe where we're going down on that road in terms of, you know, just complying with state law, in terms of what's new, what's fresh in terms of fire and flood safety. And then that would be kind of my first question. And then the second question is about like climate change and you know, and how it's twofold. We have now we have also a drought. We're in a drought, and we have drought tolerant standards. And the concern is, you know, what can we do as the city to maintain a healthy community and to address the effects of climate change? I know, you know, we've talked about air quality and EV charging, you know, and EV electric vehicles, but I'm just curious about what, you know, the community can expect to know more about, and you know, just be curious.
Yeah, no, great set of questions. I think I'll take them backwards just because I can remember the second one better. But I'll have you refresh my mind. I'm pretty sure I knew what it was. It's interesting about the drought, you know, and how that's making us rethink plans and policies that we might have all started collectively. I say we, you know, like trees, you know, tree canopy. Trees are great at certain ones clean the air. They also provide shade, which is super important in those high heat days, and bringing down your, you know, your power bill, you know, for air conditioning, especially if you have an older housing stock, inefficient, you know, air conditioning units. You know, trees are great, right? Who doesn't love trees? Well, except that with high winds and extreme storms, trees fall over. They fall on power lines. You now have hazard issues. So it's that trade-off between, hey, you know, 364 days a year, I want a tree with shade, but oh, it takes water that we don't have. And on that, maybe that one day a year when the Santa Anas are blowing, you know, it makes a mess, it breaks windows, and it could, in fact, spark a fire or close streets when it comes down, right? So this is where the idea of urban forestry as a concept, Monique, is just really important to balance all of the challenges and benefits of, say, an urban tree canopy, right? You know, so there's just an example of how the drought is making us rethink. We were encouraging trees. Maybe we weren't always encouraging the local trees because, you know, Palo Verde doesn't put off a lot of shade, right? That's why it's drought tolerant. It doesn't have a big leafy canopy that needs a lot of water, right? So they're hardy trees. They're maybe attractive as ornamental, but they're not really shade trees, right? So it's those sorts of things that we've seen cities wrestle with as they really get serious about, or more serious about, climate sustainability and resilience, right? You want a tree that's got a hardy root system, but doesn't take a lot of irrigation. It doesn't have big limbs, but it's got to put off shade. And so you see cities really struggling with that, especially if they have a strong tree program, right? And so, I can't opine because you have to weigh it for what the benefits are, right? The obvious one is if you can, if your city can afford to underground your wires, you're a lot better off. And so that kind of pivots back now to your first question, which is, as all of these safety elements are being updated, because it's the 8-year cycle and the housing element update, they're taking a look very seriously at fire in particular, and to a lesser degree flooding. I'll say that at least the jurisdictions that we've been involved with, but fire is the main topic, and it's about defensible space. It's about even banning certain types of trees or shrubberies that are fire prone, and that gets private landowners super vocal and excited, shall we say. And you have that balance of people saying, but I don't want to live with a 30-foot buffer. I'm just picking a number, of no trees. That's not it's not why I moved to this community. It's not attractive to me. I think it affects my property value, right? Like, we've heard all of that. And yet the interface is, especially that urban wildland interface is, it's just becoming very serious. And as we see the climate changing, the predictions are that we're going to have, the same rain or less. And I'm talking about the drought condition we have now, right? Not our historic averages, but it's going to come in different spurts. It's going to come all at once. So you have the flooding issue, and spring is going to happen sooner because winter isn't going to be as cold. And so you're going to have these different growing seasons for fuels. So that has fire departments worried about fire danger. So, one of the new state requirements that is being addressed through the safety element update is the need to have 2 ways of egress if you're in the very high fire hazard severity zone. That is a terrible acronym to try to get out. And that's not true of older neighborhoods that built a lot of cul-de-sacs, because you're getting up into canyons and hills. And so a lot of them have but one way in and out. And so that's becoming a challenge. Fire departments in the state is really leading minimum streets, turning radius, things we don't think about, that the trucks have a hard time getting to fight fires, when on some of these more country roads up in hilly areas don't have the sort of turning radii and sort of minimum widths that they want. So other cities are taking up parking restrictions on street parking during high wind events. And so that takes a level of coordination and systems that I haven't quite explored with you yet. I'm so sorry. What kind of alert systems you have, and essentially, the old telephone, warning out, using cell phones and landlines and other means to tell people, hey, the Santa Anas are coming, or, whatever the combination of events are. For the next 48 hours, there will be no on-street parking in these fire zone areas, not super popular with the citizens, but when you explain that it's saving their house, you make that pretty clear that this is about the need to evacuate and or just to get apparatus to you, and that minutes can make a difference of your roof going up in flames, So I think through a really robust education process, I'm seeing cities really consider this more and more and more. So, fuel stricter than even the requirements that are on the books today on fuel reduction measures. And that means having to get enforcement out there, because the saying, any law without enforcement is merely a suggestion. So passing the ordinance, but then getting code enforcement out there prior to fire season, redefining fire season because of the changing climate, and offering some assistance again to the elderly, the socioeconomically, depressed who cannot afford a crew out every year of arborists and folks to, properly prune their trees and their shrubs. And the idea of offering some kind of assistance, could be something you consider to sort of tie in EJ and fire safety, if that's what the data shows, people are interested in. So long-winded answer. I hope I got most of the points you asked about.
Yeah, thank you. Great response.
I want to offer any of the members of the public too. I mean, I think this is a great discussion, and I hope everyone's learning, but please jump in. If anyone who's joined would like to, we are asking that you use the function to raise your hand. You can use the chat. Oh, I see a couple of people have. We have. And also, or just unmute. There's not many of us that if someone would at any point like to ask a question, a follow-up, or a brand new question, please, this is your meeting. We are here for really, we serve at your pleasure because we are here to talk to the public. I'll go back to the city then. We can keep talking. I think this is all very helpful. Any other questions or topics? Any of the other panelists?
Monique has her hand up.
Yes.
Yes, I'm just, one of the items that I'm hoping we can incorporate into this environmental justice element and safety element is the concept of crime prevention through environmental design. Just having some kind of design standards that impact safety, such as dead spaces and view corridors. We talk about lighting and of course security and all those features that can improve security and safety in a neighborhood. That we could perhaps, as we are growing, there's an opportunity for that implementation now as we continue to grow throughout the community.
Yeah. I have not taken that head on. So that's an interesting concept, and I'd love to explore that with you more later. I mean, I immediately got what you were saying when you explained it. Thank you. But I have to say that I mean, that would truly make Hemet a leader, in this area, at least in the region that I know of, to take that on and to tie it, as you said, to climate and safety and and environmental justice. So I'm so sorry. Haven't been sick for 2 years. Got on a plane without a mask. I'm just gonna leave that comment alone. I see Jacqueline being very good about it. So
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Folks are a little gun shy here to get involved in the conversation, but I think there's some good discussions here, good questions, good answers, good food for thought, if you will, as we go forward. We're talking about all the different components of how we live, work, and play in a city. And you talked about connectivity, you talked about safety, you talked about fire hazards and crime prevention. A lot of those tie into how we set up our neighborhoods initially. And I think that's one of the things that we need to be mindful as being a city that's growing rapidly with a lot of subdivisions and neighborhoods coming in. We have to build that into the process, otherwise it'll be too late after they're done. So walkability, having a close place where you can go within a 5-minute walk for shopping or needing your services, having an open space and park that you can go to, being that our lots are getting smaller as we grow.
Yes.
So those type of things that just hasn't brought up to the forefront that we have to consider. Also, you have to consider your city's makeup. We have a large senior population in the city, and we have a growing young families that are coming into the city. So what are their needs, and how did that play into the new safety components or environmental justice component? What are their needs that we don't think about because we're not in that age group, or we're not in that economic group, or what have you. So we have to really look at everything as a whole, and any participation, again, encourage all the folks to put it, a phone call, an email, whatever you like to do, whatever you're comfortable, that we can put it into that process and fold it into the final document.
Absolutely. I'll put a big plug in for the surveys that just went live today. There are a series of questions asking folks to sort of rank importance, but also some open-ended questions, very much to HP's point. Suggestions can really be the seed of great governance, and the idea that one set of eyes can't be everywhere in the city, and isn't as familiar with every sensitive or vulnerable group. I will bring up the fact you said you have a lot of elderly. I will also challenge all of us, who some of us have been doing this a while, that people are living longer and their needs are much different into their 80s and 90s than we might have seen with our own grandparents or parents, and all of a sudden mass transit takes on really paratransit. People are living well into their late 80s and 90s, in which even walking to the bus stop and getting up the stairs is not an option anymore. And so how a city adapts to aging population who is living much longer than maybe your services and infrastructures have considered. And that's, as the boomers are aging, that's a rapid thing that's coming. And so, again, every community is different. In Los Angeles, LA Metro has now micro metro, which is just an amazing concept if it can work for folks who really, even a 5 or 6 block walk to a bus stop is really beyond their current abilities, but they're not quite to a paratransit, and so I think you're absolutely right. And understanding where your transit needs are today for the elderly is not going to be the same for your young families, at all, who want to get to school and shopping. They don't need to get to a doctor's appointment every week, for example. And so understanding what has happened, when businesses cluster either by design or just they do, how well served are those essential services, and how well connected are they to the populations who need them. So really great topics to consider, as you said, in a city that's growing rapidly. That's both opportunity and challenges,
I would echo in to say as well, this is Greg Ludden, Battalion Chief with the Fire Department here in Hemet, and the resiliency of the population that we have in here, and that whether that has to do with the at-risk population of the elderly in the ages, or at-risk population in the, some of the socioeconomic areas. But what I can tell you is based on population-wise, we have people that have greater use of city services, especially in the public safety element, than is of an average city of the same size. And so that's something that we certainly need to take into consideration when we deal with all of the plans, whether that be for the disaster or just on a daily basis. We on the fire side, who do also perform emergency medical services from a first responder aspect, feel it pretty significantly. The increasing number of calls, but the increasing number of calls with a decreasing amount of acuity. People calling 911 because they basically don't have, there's not another option presented to them, or they don't have any other option. is definitely something that we see in growing continuously, over the past few years. And then as we see the growth in one area, that tends to become the focus of change because we can address new construction issues, but the existing conditions, if they're poor, those are one of the things that we've got to address to make those improvements to as well, which are difficult because then those usually have some type of an impact on them, either in the housing element or the financial element as well. So I would encourage too, in addition, if we're looking out to the community to get that community input, some of the local community groups that are very active in there and definitely being going out on a face-to-face. My city youth tends to be one of those areas that's very central, and they tend to bring a lot of the community together based on their location and based on their active involvement in the community. And so, as well as some of the other local groups, philanthropic groups, Lions Club or Elks, or even American Legion. So all of those are there, but we find a lot of these people that, and that they want the face-to-face, they want the interaction. And so it's just really looking at being able to get out there. If you're looking for that whole community approach, that whole community interaction to, the changes in the future and the plans that we want to make.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those contributions. Yes, the outreach that we're doing here that is primarily for public will also include exactly what you were suggesting, both agencies from a governmental, but also non-governmental entities, such as philanthropic organizations. And so we have actually a separate set of interview questions when we address stakeholders who are more or less speaking for a swath of the population, as you suggested. And so getting out and understanding who they are and who they represent, or just who they interact with on a more regular basis, or who they advocate for, that has been a great wealth of information as we've done these in other communities. So we look forward to that effort that actually is beginning very shortly, and we look forward to mining that. We spend 60 to 90 minutes with each stakeholder. So when we get them talking, they love talking about their mission and their purpose and being helpful. So we have found that those stakeholder interviews to be really, really wealthy. So thank you. And I might follow up with you for a list on some of those, which I tried to jot down, but I was also trying to listen. So I thank you for that. I couldn't agree more on the vulnerability of some of your population to the resilience, the bouncing back, if people aren't familiar with the term, after a stressor, and we often come to it with our own point of view, which is, if the lights went off, it would stink for a while and then they'd come back on, because they always have. But when you're maybe in the oldest housing stock that is poorly served by the grid, it might be days, and you are if you're at the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder, you can least afford to lose a refrigerator full of food. How do you bounce back from that when you've sunk your whole, monthly Social Security check or whatnot into that? Also, just having somewhere to go during a storm, during an event, and the idea that, and this is going back to one of the things HP asked me, is what are other cities considering as part of our safety element updates that we've done after we've done the climate vulnerability assessment and really shown them that, this is, we go out and we ask people what's been the hardest thing that you've experienced, and they're like, I have nowhere to go with my elderly mother and my young children, and we don't want to sleep in a gymnasium, and how about a hotel voucher system during assistance during events, that sort of thing. Because it's a hardship when you have someone with limited mobility and needs medication at certain times of the night, or, medication that needs to be refrigerated, things that if you're not very, very familiar with, become really big deals during a a weather or natural disaster, sort of event where people need to leave their housing quickly. So I do say that that's been some new policies that I've seen in safety elements to just increase the public awareness and the announcements to, please, don't try to ride this out in your house. Don't shelter in place. Move to a shelter now, sort of thing. Mobilizing your access to transit to move people. Don't we can't assume everyone has reliable transportation, and even if they do, because maybe they get to work in it, it might not be able to move a multi-generational family. And back to we're all living longer, and we're encouraging sort of aging in place, but that's a special consideration if you do need to evacuate. So that has been some policies that have bubbled up through this process and been added to safety elements.
I just want to add to that. I think there's a good component that's coming out of this discussion. And one of the items that you kind of alluded to was the co-op of existing facilities or services. So such as medication that needs to be refrigerated. If you can discuss the options of existing pharmacies or other locations where you can go to those places and fill those if you can't get to it due to road closures or damage to your home and you can't enter, then if you already have these things in place, that you can go to any pharmacies near that you can get those needs met. Same thing with transportation. Maybe we could have an agreement with a larger entity like school district that we can utilize the buses to transport people out of town if need be, without gridlocking the system where everybody's in their individual vehicles. So something like that can be, it could be a far-fetched if you just look at it as a face value, but if you're looking at complete safety of the entire town being evacuated, and you put 90,000 people in a car and move them out at the same time, nobody's going to get out of town. So you have to have something in place to get those components moving without waiting until the last minute to get that done. So if you foresee it, if you get it ahead of time, get the agreements, then I think it will work a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great participation, and exactly where this outreach needed to go and to discuss. And I appreciate everybody spending a better part of an evening with us. So again, we're here to talk about transportation, housing, quality of life, fire, flood, safety, changing climate. Any topic, any of those topics. I would say no topics off limits, but I don't want to say that. Any area under those broad topics are open for discussion.
Hey, Heidi, this is Glenn. Can I get a copy of the PowerPoint from you or somebody else that's on the presentation?
I believe it'll be available on the city website, correct?
Yes, there will be.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes.
As well as this recording.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, we thank you for asking, Glenn, and I really do encourage anyone who has come to share with your neighbors, your friends, let them know again about the information that we've given, and that if they couldn't make this workshop, there's still an opportunity to participate. And we'd love to hear from them. As Monique and HP have said, there's multiple ways. There's Monique's email still up there. She would love to hear from you. But phone calls, survey results, and please sign up on the survey. There's another way to add your email address to be notified personally of upcoming events and progress as we work through the process on the safety element and environmental justice elements. So if you know anyone who might be interested, please share this information with them. It's not too late to participate, and we'd love to have more people come out for workshop number 2.
Heidi, will we be adding the survey onto that website that's listed here, the Environmental Justice Safety Element website? There will be a survey. We will upload that survey to the website so that the members of the community can take that awesome pop quiz.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's only 8 questions, folks. I really is we're you know, I'm not sure it's optimized for smartphones though. I think it's best. I could be wrong. See, I could be wrong. I'm not the right person to ask about that. But I think it's probably best through a computer, but we can see if it's at all doable on a smartphone. You can do it while you're standing in line at the grocery store.
It will be available on smartphones on all
Excellent.
platforms.
I love being wrong. Thank you.
And it's available in English and in Spanish as well.
Yes, yes, yeah. So yeah, exactly. And so when we post this, I'll make sure all the links are working and spelled correctly and all that. And then we'll post this up, you know, what, first thing tomorrow morning, you know, that maybe tonight, I'm not sure. I can't speak for everybody, but any other questions?
Heidi, I think we're at the a little past 1 hour mark, and I think this was a great discussion. And again, the video, the link, the survey will all be on the website. So anybody who wants a copy will be available on the website, and we'll make sure that it gets uploaded and available, both in Spanish and English.
I think a question that I received, I'll ask you, a question I received last night. I was at another city council in another jurisdiction and getting the safety element approved, environmental justice element approved. And a question came up from a city council member, and I thought I'd just offer up to this panel to explain to anybody, how does this process we're going through right now connect to the approval of the housing element? Are they interconnected? I know the answer. I'm asking on purpose if anybody wanted to explain. Is one dependent on the other? You know, those sorts of questions actually came up from city council members. And so, because it is, you know, it's only once every 8 years that you update the housing element, so you can have a new set of folks, a new set of stakeholders involved in it. So I don't know if anyone wants to field that on the interconnectivity or lack of interconnectivity between everything that's going on within the general plan. Oh, don't make me answer my own question, you guys. I mean, the short answer is this is not dependent. This process does not is not a requirement to have the housing element approved and that process concluded. It is triggered by the fact that if you update, you know, I believe 2 elements of the general plan, it triggers the need to perform, you know, some of the process that we're in. So that's the interconnectivity. But we were specifically asked that if they wanted to tinker with what we thought was the final, the safety element, was that going to hold up the housing element? And the answer is no. They are on separate but somewhat tangential tracks, but I thought that was an interesting question to explore. So our timeline for the safety element and the housing element are somewhat independent, and taking our time, having the city take its time and being thoughtful is in no way jeopardizing the sort of mandatory deadlines that exist around the housing element. So I just wanted to put that out there if that was of interest to anybody.
Great, thank you. And I would just add that we have submitted our housing element to the HCD, Housing Community Development, and I believe we're on the second round of comments from HCD. So we are very close to having that certified by HCD.
Also related to process is that a safety element update, which is done fairly infrequently. I mean, I have been working with some cities in which the flood maps were still in black and white and on a Xerox. Okay, like you can still see that. I'm not kidding. Like 2008, might have been the last time they updated their safety elements. So that's been interesting. And so for those unfamiliar with the process, this will be reviewed by CAL FIRE. And so there is a process and an agency who will advise both on a preliminary and then a real final. And it comes back as like a scorecard. It's a checklist. And there will be, yes, it's included. There will be suggestions, which we have found mostly incredibly helpful. And some, depending on your reviewer, but in general, some of them have been quite specific. I mean, just like the addition of this word, or this phrase. And it was related to outreach on, again, fuel reduction. And it was just a suggestion from CAL FIRE in one jurisdiction to add on outreach materials to public landowners, especially focused on I think they said disadvantaged communities. So I thought there was a good tie-in, because again, they're only reviewing the safety element, but an acknowledgement of the increasing awareness of EJ issues. And I thought that was just a spot-on comment that we got in a different jurisdiction from CAL FIRE. And it was an easy one to, and that was on an existing policy. So, when we say that we're revising policies, there's not always a wholesale revision. It can be just a, especially targeting this audience, or, through these means, or even adding some great programs that you might have that have probably come up since the last time that you have updated your safety element. So it is not one of the more frequently touched elements of a general plan. So, but yeah, we look forward to the process with the CAL FIRE on that. And then the environmental justice element does not have a parallel, reviewing body. It's more like your circulation element. It's sort of self-governing as to how far you want to go in adoption of that, and how far how far you want to take, from aspirational goals to actually considering implementation of them. So that, again, being brand new, we're seeing a wide array of responses, even in jurisdictions that have not identified any census tracts with disadvantaged community. Again, you all have 4, so the burden is kind of a little higher for you all. I don't say burden, I mean the focus is, the requirements are a lot more explicit, but other jurisdictions have gone ahead and added new policies in existing elements that addresses it, because their thoughts were, well, maybe we just don't know of them, and maybe we end up with pockets of disadvantaged or vulnerable communities that move in, or folks fall into that category over the lifetime of the element, because some of these elements, the city does not update that frequently. So everyone's kind of doing their own thing, but everybody's doing it. Even Beverly Hills had to look at environmental justice. So, so everybody's doing it.
I like to see the Beverly Hills neighborhood garden.
Exactly.
Thank you, Heidi. I just wanted to point out that we are over the hour mark. So just want to thank everybody for their time. And if anybody has any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Monique on the screen, and we'll wrap up this workshop for tonight. And we'll look forward to a second workshop to be announced in a bit.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, I think it's just us. I apologize. I could not get my